Your Excellency, Mr. Tariq Islam, Vice President of the Human Rights Council, Mr. Volker Turk, United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It is with great honor for me to make these remarks on behalf of the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, KNCHR, during the 60th anniversary of the adoption of the International Convention on the Elimination of all forms of racial discrimination. This milestone is a reminder of our shared commitment to the promotion of equality and justice for all, regardless of race, color, descent, or national and ethnic origin. Kenya has made strides towards eliminating racial discrimination, but much work remains to be done. I'll take this opportunity to highlight some of the efforts the Commission and the government have made in addressing some of these gaps, and especially in relation to the indigenous peoples, persons with albinism, refugees, and marginalized communities. Indigenous persons. General comment number 34 on racial discrimination against people of African descent outlined that racism and racial discrimination against people of African descent are expressed in many forms, notably structural and cultural. In this regard, the KNCHR continues monitoring and investigating violations against indigenous people in Kenya, particularly forest-dwelling communities. We continue conducting high-level independent fact-finding missions to Embu Boot Forest, where we investigate the human rights violations committed against the Sengwer indigenous community. These violations have unearthed systemic violations on their right to life, liberty, security of person, culture, religious beliefs and practices, as well as property. Additionally, KNCHR continues advocating for the implementation of the African Commission and African Court on Human and People's Rights decisions regarding the Endorois and Ogiek indigenous communities in Kenya. A task force was formed to implement these decisions, and the KNCHR has been issuing advisories to relevant government agencies to that effect. Lack of political goodwill and commitment from the government has hindered the full implementation of these decisions. KNCHR has appeared as amicus curiae in a petition filed by members of the Ogiek community of Jipkitale. We have also been involved in the Red Plus project, which aims to ensure that forest communities are meaningfully engaged in the conservation and sustainable utilization of forest resources. The Commission also leads the implementation of Kenya's National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights, which directly impacts the rights of indigenous communities, particularly their right to land and freedom of expression. Persons with albinism. General comment number 37 of 2024 on equality and freedom from racial discrimination in the enjoyment of the rights to health highlighted that employment, education, exposure to the physical environment, occupational hazards, housing, chemicals, air and water quality, sanitation and hygiene, climate change and economic, social and development policies have a significant impact on one's health and well-being as they influence access to resources, opportunities, and the quality of life. Structural determinants have the largest impact on patterns of health inequalities. Racism, classism, sexism, ableism, xenophobia are among the structural determinants of health. The Kenya National Commission on Human Rights uses general comments and concluding observations to actively advocate for the protection of the rights of persons with albinism in Kenya, including the right to health. We continue monitoring and investigating reports of persons with albinism targeted for dangerous ritual practices and have been working closely with the state and non-state actors to put in place better protection mechanisms to safeguard this vulnerable group. We co-led in the development of the National Action Plan on Albinism and have been calling for its adoption by the Cabinet. Additionally, Kenya National Commission on Human Rights was on the forefront to advocate for Kenya's ratification of the African Disability Protocol, which specifically protects the rights of persons with albinism. As a result of these efforts, Kenya ratified the protocol in 2021, and we are hopeful that its implementation will significantly improve the situation for persons with albinism in Kenya. In collaboration with organizations representing persons with albinism, we mapped the laws, policies, and programs that address albinism, ensuring that there is greater transparency and accountability in the protection of their rights. On refugees, asylum seekers, and stateless persons, the Commission is also committed to advancing the rights of refugees and asylum seekers. We are currently implementing the project focused on improving the protection and integration of refugees and host communities in Kenya. In 2019, we launched an inquiry into the human rights situation in Dadaab and Kakuma refugee camps, two of the largest refugee camps in the country, and we shared our findings to the various state and non-state actors. Since ratifying the convention, positive outcomes have been realized in Kenya, including the granting of citizenship to previously stateless communities such as the Pemba, Makonde, and the Shona. Moreover, Kenya has introduced the Shirika Plan, which aims to promote the socio-economic inclusion of refugees by transforming camps into integrated settlements, providing refugees with better access to services and opportunities for self-sufficiency. Kenya has also embraced access to justice for marginalized communities through the institutionalization of alternative justice models and initiatives such as the rolling out of the e-filing of cases and establishing high court sub-registries closer to those communities. Key challenges. The first key challenge that has been witnessed is in regards to resourcing of the various institutions charged with the responsibilities and mandates of protecting the rights of the indigenous communities as well as the refugees and among others. It is for this reason that we call upon the government of Kenya to avail resources for that particular purpose. In conclusion, we wish to amplify the voices as follows. Number one, the need to strengthen political goodwill. Government must be committed to implementing the decisions and recommendations of regional and international human rights mechanisms, national human rights institutions and civil society organizations to enhance the advocacy and monitoring the follow-up of the recommendation. Secondly, enhancing accountability and enforcement. National human rights institutions and relevant government bodies must improve the enforcement of laws and policies to protect the rights of racially discriminated communities. Promoting inclusion and participation, all stakeholders must ensure that marginalized communities, indigenous peoples, and persons with albinism are actively engaged in the design, implementation, and evaluation of policies that affect their lives. And lastly, building capacity. National human rights institutions and civil society organizations must be adequately resourced and equipped to carry out their mandate effectively, including through the provision of technical assistance and training. In conclusion, Mr. Vice President, Kenya remains committed to the principles of the International Convention on the Elimination of all forms of racial discrimination. We urge the international community to support national human rights institutions and civil society organizations in their efforts to eliminate racial discrimination and to foster an inclusive and just society for all. I thank you all.